Okay. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole budget meeting of November 13th, 2019 to order. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given. And if assistance is required, please see the clerk. Trish, would you raise your hand for those in the audience? Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Please note, Town of Lincoln Committee and Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channels. I would like to thank the public for attending the meeting this evening. And I just want to remind everyone of our rules for engagement to please be respectful while the others are speaking, and please refrain from clapping. Please remember to silence all cellular devices. Roll of council, everyone is here. We have staff in attendance this evening for our budget meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, I see none. There are no statutory public meetings on the agenda. We have no delegations this evening. We don't have a consent agenda, but our regular agenda, we are now considering item 7.1, 2020 capital budget review. Our CAO, Mr. Michael Kirkopoulos, will be providing us a presentation this evening. Michael.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again. We are here in front of you for what is meeting number 2 of the 2020 capital budget recap. I will go through a short presentation. A big segment of the presentation does include reporting back on some of the questions and inquiries members of council had. And once again, I will do my best to answer any of the questions council has, but your senior staff, our senior staff is here this evening, and they will also be able to answer any particular questions. I would like to start and say that it is World Kindness Day, and I don't say that so that you take, so that you're soft on the CAO necessarily in terms of your questioning, but I thought it would be apropos for me to mention that and highlight that our library CO did give me a nice rock, so I'm holding it here if I need any support for myself while I'm up here answering your questions. So as I said, we are moving into meeting 2 in terms of our capital budget recap. Listed here on this slide our 2020 capital business drivers, and as previously reported and stated, they include a number of the categories that are listed here, from council priorities to asset management through to strategic asset investment, operations, service level growth, new growth, and internal capacity. This is a bit of a different slide, and I thought it was important to just talk to you about capital budgets. I spent a lot of time between the last meeting and this meeting looking for how various municipalities both communicate and share with the community the importance of funding, the importance of contributing to the construction of and the replacement of infrastructure. And so oftentimes we talk about complete communities. The capital budget is really an opportunity to fund those sentiments, those desires that councils have. So that's everything from building community through strategic decision making, how to best allocate municipal resources, how to maintain the infrastructure, and so forth. I'll bring you down to the second to last point that is important in funding complete communities, and that is where those monies come from. So approximately 30%, or a little under $10 million of this budget, is funded from external sources, as I've highlighted there, largely our development charge revenues, and another third from reserves, which are primarily external as well, but may also include some internal sources. And of course, one of the things that's important as we look to the future and fund what the future looks like is investing in that future. And so council over the last number of years has invested in a special infrastructure levy. This year we are proposing once again for council consideration at least a 1.5% special infrastructure levy, and that builds on 1.5 from last year and the 1 the year before. So growth and state of good repair, 2 terms that you've heard of before, that you've heard us speak to, both key principles and facets of budgets. And so in terms of looking at growth and growth projects, the term is fairly self-explanatory and I think speaks for itself in terms of looking at the investment into new assets to service growing populations, as well as includes various studies to plan for and support those development areas. Of course, the state of good repair, something council's focused on specifically with our roads program, but a state of good repair refers to the investment in the existing assets that we have in order to maintain, in a lot of cases, extend the useful life or the complete replacement and reconstruction of assets so that we can continue services. At the end of the day, this capital budget is made up of both. Some projects are a state of good repair projects, some are growth-related projects, and there are a few, when we look at our development-related projects, that support the existing communities, that support the existing residents that we have in that state of good repair, but that also have growth components. So once again, we were before you a few weeks ago. We were talking about the 2020 capital budget. It does include 40 proposed projects for council consideration. It is an approximate $30 million capital program. The impact to the levy, though, is $1.4 million in 2020. This is the base budget amount that is included, and as I've highlighted there, only $64,916 is levy impacted, and an increase from last year. So this falls within council's policy around CPI and using CPI as the barometer for the increase. So 5 major construction projects. We spent a lot of time last meeting talking about these. Really, these are the ones that I think take our previous averages or our previous program of anywhere from $15 to $17 million, or in and around that average range, and push it to something that is not double that, but close to double that. And as you can see, the biggest project driving that is what we've titled the Prudhome's-related project at $7.5 million, followed by Hickson Street, pumping station at 1.1, the Rotary Park development at 3.1, Lincoln Avenue at 2.1, and Rittenhouse Road reconstruction at 2.65. None of these projects, as I've highlighted here, have an impact to the tax levy. All are DC reserve and long-term borrowing funded. You'll see on your tables in front of you this particular map that highlights a layout and an allocation of the various projects and where they're occurring. I won't go through each of the projects here, but all 40 are listed, and as you can see, from Ward 1 through to Ward 4, we highlight the various elements. There is a fair and I think well-proportioned allocation of projects, of course, a lot of them at different values, some larger, some smaller, but as you can see, our program is informed by a number of variables, and those variables are spread out across the entire municipality. So again, just some considerations before we go into the council inquiries portion of the presentation for council to consider. Previous slide spoke to the fact that the levy portion is only a $65,000 increase within council policy. This continues to be, I think, as both the map and what we've said in the past and highlighted here, a holistic, investment-focused, asset-focused capital budget. We continue to invest in both hard and soft infrastructure. It has been led, and I think inputs from the resident-focused engagement we have, the conversations we have, the input from council, as you speak on behalf of a number of residents through the various means. So that is the approach we've taken in terms of planning this particular budget. And of course, we're always looking at the various financial sustainability practices. I think I probably don't spend enough time talking to council about the financial position that the town is in. I continue to share items with council in terms of highlighting the health of our community from a financial sustainability piece. You do have another document in front of you that was shared with us from the province of Ontario. We receive these fairly regularly from the province. It highlights in, I would say, probably 2 or 3 dozen various categories where the town of Lincoln ranks in terms of areas of risk, areas of success, and as you can see, in all areas except for one, we are excelling. We are on the right side of the ledger, however you want to frame that. we continue to be in very strong financial position. There is one that has since bounced back, and that is our liquidity measure. And that liquidity measure at that particular point in time was really a snapshot in terms of how we fund projects and monies that come in versus going out. And so that remains in a very strong position as well. So projects, as you see from your budget binders, are segmented by category. I think to demonstrate the investment in the various service components that Council's adopted for a number of years now, and the future state Council is envisioning as part of our priority work. So I do want to highlight the priority alignment to and the Council investment as important elements of the budget and how we lay out the budget. So moving to Council inquiries. The first one is long-term borrowing, current and projected projects. I think you saw a version of this chart last time we were in front of you. This is that chart that lays out where we're at currently right now in terms of 2019 and proposed in 20, and where our debt obligations, our long-term borrowing obligations will be over the next number of years, stretching out to 2045, and that broader planning or growth horizon that municipalities and the province works towards. You will see two lines on there. The blue line is the town guideline, and that is that 10% of own source revenue in terms of what we pay out for debt and long-term borrowing. And the green line is the 25% line, and that is the region's, that is the province's criteria and benchmark for municipalities. So once again, the green line is 25%, the blue line is 10%, and the purple bars represent proposed. And again, this is subject to Council selecting all of the projects that are in our current long-term plan. A number of things that we are trying to look forward to. There's a couple here that I've highlighted in terms of large ones that will be coming on the books. Again, these are potential, but in 2020, we have some borrowing asks, of course, that are all before you. Some of the large ones, as I highlighted in the previous slide. And then Jordan Village is a $10 million debenture that we will have in the works there. And of course, the works to Bartlett Road are another $10 million debenture. Both of those we anticipate being 30-year projects or 30-year borrowing. And so that does highlight for Council where we're at. As you can see, even incorporating all of these, even being very conservative with the amounts that we include, or in this case very liberal with the amounts that we include, we do not exceed the current policy of 10%. That is an incredible position to be in. It's a good position to be in. I can tell you a lot of the municipalities in Niagara are not in that same position right now and looking out towards growth and what's coming. Councillor Russell, you had asked the question around interest rates versus borrowing rates at the last meeting. And what we've highlighted here is really our experience in 2019, I think as an indicator or as an illustrative example of what we're looking. I will start by saying I think the general principle for us is always a greater rate of return versus a cost of borrowing. Some of those factors are beyond just the town of Lincoln's control, and there's inputs from the region, there's inputs from the province, from borrowing rates, what is our credit rating, things that are set outside of Lincoln itself. But as you can see here, our yield, or in other words, our return on our investments in 2019, specifically looking at June and some of those investment trades, has been in and around the 2.9% area. And similarly, if we looked at debenture issuance and the various capital markets, you see some ranges there from Infrastructure Ontario, IO, as it's often referred to, is often the agency that is providing those debentures. And so you see everything from a 5-year at 2.1% to a 30-year at 2.84%. The 10-year capital market serial rate is 2.45 in terms of cost of borrowing. So While the amounts are small in terms of percentages, we are on the positive side of that, and when you're talking tens of millions, and in some cases significantly more, those rates are good rates. One of the questions that I think Councillor Mikulik asked at that last meeting was also around how are we tied into these rates. This doesn't have a 5-year renewal similar to mortgages. If we tie in at a 30-year at 2.84, we are a 30-year at 2.84, and that's where it stays at. So the cost of borrowing, as we've heard from our financial advisors that come here, our various resources that we have through the banks, have often said to council over the last number of years, the cost of borrowing has never been lower, and municipalities, a little different than the average homeowner, are able through Infrastructure Ontario to tie in those rates. So there is a benefit. The other inquiry we had was around the roll-off vehicle. This one was a Public Works vehicle. I won't show you the video. It is about a 5-minute video. I know Director David Graham did share that video with members of council. The information was sent out October 31st. And this is something I think we're piloting. It is some innovative technology. It is a vehicle that can serve 3 purposes for the price of 1. So definitely efficiency from that perspective. The next project that council inquired about was our fire safety trailer, project number 17. And so that information, similarly through Chief Hudson, was sent to council on October 31st, but some highlights of that correspondence include a sponsor package. This is a project that half of the funds will be raised through sponsorship and various external means. So I think Chief Hudson did speak and did send that information out to members of councils. Some of the other points there talk about the benefits of having a fire safety trailer. So learning about life-saving lessons, fire prevention, fire safety, emergency preparedness, some of it around realistic simulations. Really a public education piece. There is an opportunity to work with schools, businesses, the various public events. And we've highlighted here, we anticipate 40 times per year, reaching about 10,000 people. As I said, we are seeking sponsorship for half of the projected cost or more. So the impact will be less than $80,000 on that. There are some potential opportunities in terms of revenue generation, reaching out to municipalities. We have heard an expressed interest from Grimsby. And just the other day, I spoke with Fort Erie's CAO, Tom Cookett, who also highlighted his interest in this particular project. And I know he was able to talk to some members of council on their fire safety trailer, so I can definitely answer any questions council may have on that. Part of Project 18 was 2 vehicles. I'm going to highlight the first vehicle here. A few members of council asked about our truck maintenance and life cycle costs. This is the 1997 pumper. And so what you've got here is our 5-year total in terms of maintenance costs. And of course, the chart on the right does highlight the cost versus time and usage and how we make decisions to replace these vehicles. This is a 22-year-old vehicle that we are looking to replace. The second part of the conversation, and probably where we spent most of our time, was the rehab and rescue truck. I think the first point is paramount there. I've got some pictures, and I can show council a number of slides that talk about what rehab and rescue vehicles do. But I can tell you this is probably the one project I spent the most time researching, both before we presented it to you last time and since that presentation. It is something we've also looked at scoping down. We were close to 400,000 last time, approximately 380. We have scoped it down to under 300,000, so almost $100,000 savings, and we're now coming in at $295,000. We definitely still need to work on the specs and get those firmly established, but we believe we can come in at significantly less than where we were on just looking at the various scope and some of the items that we think we can establish to get that truck purchased. So the benefits, it does have a service life of around 20 years. I think oftentimes we look at these vehicles, we look at the cost of these vehicles, And when we look at amortizing it over that same length, it does result in an annual investment of $19,000 per year. One of the key points I think is important to highlight in these, and again, having done research, having been with a service that has a rehab vehicle, it's often always staffed by unpaid auxiliary members. It does support the various health and safety regulations in place. It does have proper restroom facilities, et cetera. I think oftentimes we try to look at various services, we try to compare ourselves. Does the X service have it? Does Y service have it? Each service looks at its needs in a very different way, different sizes, different municipalities. So whether it's, I could give you a list of municipalities that have it, and council could give me a list of municipalities that don't. And I think that's never necessarily the way we should look at these particular expenditures. But nonetheless, there are a number of factors and collaboration opportunities. We are, again, working with Grimsby and looking at adding fire scene rehab and decontamination services to some of our existing auto aid agreements on a cost recovery and fee service basis. So here's a picture of our current vehicle and what we use it for, everything from water and ice rescue to the various rehab elements that are highlighted there. The new vehicle will continue to do those things. There are some other field decontamination elements that are important. And again, some municipalities tackle decontamination in various ways. Some have 5 different trailers that serve the 5 different functions. We are looking at rolling some of these up into one particular unit. So in terms of just some statistics around how in use our vehicle is, the current rehab and rescue truck, 36 callouts over the past 12 months, broken down as we've seen here. 4 from a water and ice rescue, 10 rehab, 4 fire training support, and 8 water and ice rescue. 40 incidents where decon services were required over the past 12 months. Some special callouts, most recently the St. Catharines Greenhouse fire, and then I've just highlighted for you there some engine hour readings in terms of how in use that vehicle has been. So once again, a similar chart in terms of our current vehicle. Council in 2014 decided to do a pilot where it looked at rehab and rescue vehicle. We purchased a used vehicle at that particular point in time. It was a 1997 vehicle at that particular point in time. And I think that pilot project, for all intents and purposes, has been a well-received and a positive outcome-based pilot project. So the next inquiry we had, and this was, I believe, through Chair Pachariva, was around basketball resurfacing. And so I've got a chart on the next page that speaks to rubberized multi-courts. They are something that are, I think, very sought after. It is something we've made an ask through our ICIP funding program to renovate all 16 community play spaces with rubberized surfaces. There's 12 playgrounds, 4 multi-sport courts. If unsuccessful, one of the options we can look at, if council is not supportive of going in this direction, and it currently is not included in the budget, is potentially a mid-year report to look at, again, maybe piloting and looking at a few sites and doing this in and around a few sites. But the next chart really lays out asphalt versus rubber from a life expectancy perspective, from a maintenance perspective, and from a cost perspective. And I think what staff reported last time we were before you was an approximate 3 to 4 time cost difference between going with what is your typical and traditional asphalt versus a rubberized multi-court. And then again, we've highlighted some information around warranty. The next project is Project 36, the 13th Street road reopening, reconstruction. I do have a few slides here. Some of this is background in terms of where we were in 2014, what caused the issues to this particular road, and that was a major rainfall event. So there was erosion damage and an emergency road closure. The damage section of 13th is located. I know a number of us have gone out, have been on the site, and know the location very well, but it is the damaged section of 13th Street along the side slope valley area of the 16-mile creek. And so the reinstatement work to reopen the road is by no means inexpensive. It is a challenging site. In 2017, our infrastructure committee considered a report outlining options to close the road permanently or to reopen it. Council directed staff at that particular point in time to investigate cost-effective solutions for reopening the road. So in 2018, we completed some improvements. We did some turnarounds. There was some closure-related signage. We did some other maintenance elements to it to help address concerns from adjacent property owners at the closure area. 2018 and 19, so into this year, the town completed the detailed design work to investigate what was the most cost-effective solution. So what council directed us was to look at cost-effective solutions in this particular area, and so that's what we did in 18 and 19. Our budget deliberations last year had this project on the list, and council did consider it at that particular point in time, but it was deferred because the design wasn't complete, and you wanted us to complete the design throughout the rest of 2019. And at that particular point in time, we were directed to bring it back as part of the 2020 budget deliberations. So here we are, 2020, almost. We're heading into budget. There is a budget ask in front of council. We believe that what we've got in front of council is the most cost-effective solution to reopen the road, should council choose to. One of the questions we were asked at that particular point in time was, were there any concerns from the agricultural community? I know Director Graham and his staff did look at this particular piece of it. There are no concerns from our agricultural community. 13th Street has an existing permanent closure north of 4th as a result of the CN Bridge being removed, resulting in one no-throughway on 13th Street. So we do have a map. The ultimate decision is, do we do it now or do it later, or does council make a different decision? The design is ready and it is available, and that's why we're before council now. So again, just a little bit of a map to familiarize yourselves with where we're at and some of the issues here, but definitely staff can speak to any questions council may have. So that does end the piece of the presentation that spoke to and that speaks to the reporting back of the questions council had at that particular point in time. The next few slides really are those summary slides that you saw that break out in various charts where most of our expenditure is going. As you can see, the environment and safety piece makes up almost $15 million. So this includes fire and rescue, waterworks, and stormwater. Roads, so our transportation category makes up nearly $10 million as well. And then our social infrastructure and corporate infrastructure make up the rest, where parks is the major driver in the social infrastructure, and in your corporate infrastructure, vehicles and equipment, and of course some facility upgrades. So the little piece that's pulled out here is the portion that impacts the capital levy. As you can see, the other larger three portions, almost split, a third, and a third, are made up of reserve funds, long-term borrowing, and development charges, with some reserves and grants making up the rest. And again, the levy portion is broken out into those categories. The following four slides really lay out what you saw and what we went through at the last meeting, Chair, and that is the various projects, how they're funded in the various categories. The following slide here is your draft budget, and again, a percentage breakdown in terms of where the project spending is occurring, as well as the funding sources that I went through on the previous slides, and a summary slide again that reiterates where we're at in terms of some of the capital levy increases, special infrastructure levy, and so forth. And our next steps. We are in front of you again, November 27th. There are 2 meetings also scheduled in December. We may need to add a third one, and we will work with our clerk staff to do that should we need to add a third one as we head into operating and look to wrap up capital. I did send members of council an email probably about an hour before this meeting started. There is a project in here around Bartlett Road, specific to some of the truck route studies that we need to look at. We did hear back from the region, as this is a regional issue as much as it's a local issue, that the region will be cost sharing that. So that is an $80,000 savings from where we're currently at in terms of that project. That wasn't a $160,000 project. It will now be an $80,000 project. So we can either reapportion those monies to decrease the levy impact and or seek council direction on anywhere else you may want to put it. So once again, we will be in front of you November 27th, hoping to do an introduction to the operating budget at that meeting, look at our water and wastewater rates, and our user fee bylaw. So, Mr. Chair, I am in your hands now, as is the rest of the senior team, to answer any questions council may have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike, for your presentation and bringing back those questions and queries that were raised at our last budget meeting a couple weeks ago. Kind of at the disposal of committee on how you want to attack this. Do you want to take a look at items that are directly related to the tax levy? Because the other ones that are reserve fund or DCs really don't have an impact. So wondering if you want to go through it one by one and just, read out and if we have any questions. And Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tried to pipe in early because mine's more of an overall question to everybody, or to the CAO. Thanks for bringing back the information that we requested last meeting. Just, again, a couple points that I thought about after the fact, which is usually what kind of gets me into trouble. So all the total projects, we have about $780,000 associated with contingency funding, which, again, it kind of always irks me a little bit because that seems to me kind of like that slush fund that is available for, obviously, contingencies, but anytime funding is available, I find that funding gets spent. So with that in mind, of that $780,000, there's about $60,000 that actually is directly impacted by levy charges. So has there been any thought to remove contingency funding altogether and then just try to stick to the budget that's approved?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, why don't I take a stab at that? And I know both Director Graham and McKay may want to speak to the various elements because a lot of their projects are the ones that include these contingency funds. And I think historically, maybe I'll start through your chair to the councillor by talking about, I think we've gotten significantly better at the way we budget projects. I think, oftentimes municipalities need to be looking at projects and looking at them in their totality. There's various elements that go into projects, from project management to site works to the investigative studies. And so I think typically good project management would tell you contingencies are important. Some people budget 15%. I think on average we're anywhere between 5 and 10%. Depending on the complexity of the project, the type of the project. And so I think there's always, it's a good question. It's a question, have we considered it? Yes. I think I never want to underestimate the challenges of some of the projects we're working on and then be forced to be back in front of you asking for more money and maybe not having an ability to find that money depending on where it's coming from. Specifically the piece that's on the levy. So the 60,000 you mentioned. I suppose the other pieces are probably a little easier to track down. But definitely I think it's something we can look at. I know, again, both Shannon and Dave may have some comments, so I'll turn it to them through you, Chair, maybe to provide some comments on their particular projects and the need for contingencies.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Well, as a project manager and a certified PMP, I would tell you that you absolutely need to budget for contingencies in the projects. Many of these projects, because we're going out for detailed design, because there's a lot of site studies, you don't know what you're going to come across. Having said that, when we do give budget ranges to the contractors or to a consultant, we don't include that contingency. So we give the price where we've budgeted and believe the estimate should come in. That contingency is really for the unknowns that may come up, and we don't treat it as a slush fund to dip into to increase scope.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just to add a couple comments as well. A lot of our projects, when we dig underground and things like that, there are unknowns we do come across that you can't always design for or know about. So it is good practice to carry a level of contingency for those unknown circumstances that you will come across. But again, we're very disciplined with that type of, contingency. It's only for any unknown circumstances, excuse me, that you may come across, so.
So, Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up. So is there any reporting back to council on when that can, again, not dollar by dollar, penny by penny, when it's being utilized, but an after project report on how much of that contingency was used and for what purposes? Is there any accountability on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say, the answer to that is yes, but I'll turn it to Terry to maybe highlight how we do that reporting back.
So through the chair, when we do our year-end reporting, we bring back a listing of what has been spent out of the various reserves, particularly the DC funds, and outline which portion of the capital levy is going to go into the capital levy reserve fund. With the other reserves, they just don't get pulled out at all. If any project is going over what's been budgeted, then we need to bring it back to council in order to get approval for more. If it stays under the budgeted amount, it just goes back into the reserves.
Mr. Chair, so the answer is no. That's what I heard out of that.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think if I could decipher what I think our finance director is saying is that we often report back, and we do report back, not often. We report back on a quarterly basis. We do on a yearly basis. I don't think we do it to the level of detail, maybe on a per project basis, although it depends on where those projects are funded from, to the level maybe that you're inquiring, council. So I think that's what I take from the director's comments, is that we don't come back to that level of detail. But I get your point around 60,000 of it is from the levy, and if we can go back and look at that particular piece, I don't recall exactly on the capital budget where that contingency of $60,000 is coming from. We can definitely go back and look at that particular piece.
Yep.
It's
It's a mix of different projects. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, you're welcome, Vice Chair Russell. And I think too, looking to clear up, not clear up, but just get some cognizant answers going forward. So, maybe part of the reporting as we come through these projects, the ones that are identified that have a contingency, rather than reporting on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis, whether it goes in or out, maybe we look at, was the contingency used or not, and to what percentage, and maybe going forward, rather than have the 5 to 15%, we establish a baseline. Infrastructure projects carry a 10%. Other things carry, whatever that committee wishes to establish. So then instead of having that vague, I don't mean vague, but that range, it's a little bit narrower focus. And then if it's drawn upon, we examine it. Through you, Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Always good suggestions in terms of how we look at contingencies. Definitely something that we can take away. The only comment I think that I would make as it relates to contingencies and establishing a baseline is that sometimes I don't want to establish a baseline and then work to the baseline. I'd rather look at, if it's a simple project, not a complex project, establish a much lower contingency. Maybe in that particular case, it's 2 to 3%. I don't know. And I think sometimes when you establish baselines, I think they're good in some areas on the more complex projects, but on the simpler projects, there's often an opportunity or a challenge No different than the conversation we're just having around why do we need contingency. So,
Yeah.
you know, I duly noted. I think, you know, we've tried to move in a direction where we are budgeting appropriately for these projects, budgeting tightly. Any change orders, you know, cross multiple desks, mine included. So a number of eyes are looking at them before anything's approved. But, you know, I appreciate the comments from council on making sure anything we budget for that isn't needed reverts back to the reserves that we have.
Yeah, and I like your answer on that, and maybe, you know, maybe just a step further, a little bit of a point of clarification going forward, and for next year's budget, is the contingencies highlighted in the notes, the percentages noted, and the unknowns that we might experience. And I think it's just, you know, that gives a better sense of comfort and how that might be used. Vice Chair Russell, do you agree? Okay, excellent. Councillor Mikluck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to our CAO. I have to be honest, when I first saw this capital budget, my eyes almost fell out of my head. But after, you know, seeing what we're doing here and the investment that we're making, when, you know, it's all about timing, and like you pointed out with the interest rates being the way they are, a lot of these projects, when are we going to do them, you know? And if we wait, are they going to get cheaper? Are they going to become more expensive? So, you know, locking in and doing what we can do to make our home a better place, it's similar to a home improvement. And I want to thank you for the detailed explanations you know, through the, you know, the various items that we brought up for you to review and for you to explain. I thought it was very comprehensive and well laid out. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mikluck. Yeah, you're right. It's a budget based on growth. It's a budget based on future growth. And a lot of the, you know, the driver, you saw the big one is Prudhome's. And then having been on council since 2002 and kicking around the Main Street, 19th Street revitalization, you know, it's coming. It's closer than you know, it's ever been expected. It's on the horizon. So these are good projects that we've been waiting for. Things are starting to line up. We're getting good value for them. So it's about proceeding and then laying that foundation for that growth to come. So do we want to start at the top? And I'll read the project, and if we have any questions, and then we'll go through and buzz in, and I'll call upon you. Some of these should go. No, I don't. You know what? I don't want to curse it. I don't want to curse it, so I'm not going to say that. I'll take that out. Okay, so project number 1 is IT equipment. Any questions with that? Okay. Project number 2 is library IT equipment. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. My only question is regarding the levy portion. I guess I'm probably going to ask this a few times because anything that's levy, it catches my attention. So I don't understand why we break it down to like 30,000. It's going to be levy, and the rest is out of equipment replacement reserve. So why the breakdown? I don't know. Should I ask through to Terry?
So through the chair, the reserve can only be used to replace existing ones. A lot of these are brand new, the new workstation, etc. And that's pretty much why. Sorry.
Perfect. Okay, that's what I needed to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, and then Councillor Timmers, and then next time when the life cycle comes up on these will come out of equipment reserves. So first time is capital levy.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So project number 3, the gateway signage upgrading at the QEW. Okay, project number 4, the Fleming Library office renovations. And number 5, the Penn West roof replacement. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Patriva. Through you to maybe the, well, anyway, I'll leave it for staff, maybe Shannon McKay. So just with regards to this, I know we had some discussion. We were told at the last meeting that there are a number of items that are being stored there. I guess just when I look at this particular project as well as project number 6, and I combine them, and we're up close to $300,000. I guess my only question through you, Chair, would be, you know, there's risks in anything we do. I mentioned at the last meeting that my concern is that, you know, I don't want to be spending $300,000 and seeing these buildings, you know, remain vacant. So I guess through you, Chair, you know, it says under alternatives considered, it says continue to patch the roof. I guess through you, Chair, I guess I would ask the logical question, how much have we spent in roof repairs over the last little while versus, you know, spending $135,000?
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I'm going to have to get back to you on that, because I don't know the exact total cost for the roof repairs for the 2 facilities over the past 3 to 5 years.
Okay, I just, you know, I just think, you know, for us to make a, you know, informed decision, I mean, yeah, we can just say, go ahead and spend the money, and there is risk, there's risk. We need to make sure that whatever's being stored there, we maintain them properly. We don't want to have an issue where we're losing, you know, particular items that are stored there, but I just want to make sure we're making an informed decision. So if we could see that, I think it would go a long way. Thank you.
If I could, through you, Chair, just make a comment on this. We are touring this facility tomorrow with Mayor Easton. It was one of the suggestions and comments that came out of the last particular meeting. I also did review a 2014 report that highlighted the need for this particular facility and the roof replacement and some of the challenges around the roof. You know, one of the issues is what we have stored there and the value of what we have stored there. And I think as we go to the next project, one of the reasons why we're not potentially looking at just a patch job on the Diamond property, and that is definitely something council could consider and send us back on. If you're going to occupy some of these facilities with people and have people in and out of them, there's a certain level of repair that needs to get done. Yeah. If it is simply going to be something we keep until we figure out what we're doing with it, and that may be a consideration when we think about the Diamond building, then maybe we do a smaller repair job and we defer that. But if we are going to have people going in and out of it, some of the issues around the septic, some of the issues around fumes and things and how they kind of make their way in and out of the building need to be addressed. But we can get to that when we're looking at the Diamond property, which I think is next on your list. But I can definitely work with staff to share information with council on both what was in that 2014 report that came before you and that Community Services Committee approved, and subsequently any information we have on repairs since then.
Okay. I'm going to go to Councillor Michalak, and then I'll get a question for Mr. CAO. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to what Councillor Brunet is saying, what's currently in these buildings? We don't know what's in these buildings. Where are the assets currently that we are proposing to put in these buildings? Like what's the urgency? We're talking 2 buildings here. Where are they currently? Where are the assets currently being stored? Is there an advantage to having this space, or are we just fixing it because they're bad?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we are in need of that space from an operations perspective, from a storage perspective. Currently, Penn West does have a number of municipal assets in it, from equipment that's not being used in this current season. There is the high barn that was removed a number of years ago. There are other museum assets that, as we took down the assets that were on site in Jordan, had to be stored. They were on site outside. They're being stored inside. So there are a number of municipal assets that are up there in a more climate-controlled environment. They're regularly checked on, the space is regularly checked on, but it is a facility that we do use currently for storage, and quite a bit of it for both public works and community services.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, and just a question through to the CAO. Possibility of any revenue streams from this? We've had, a few resident inquiries about the potential use and some of the issues were surrounding the roof. So by fixing the roof, is there then the potential for a revenue stream?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the answer would be maybe.
Okay.
And I only say maybe from the fact that we have a number of our own storage challenges. We have a number of facilities. We have a number of things that we need to find places for. It's often cheaper and more inexpensive if we use our own facilities to do that, but definitely cognizant. I know I fielded a number of calls, both through you and Councillor Brunet and other members of council, the mayor and so forth, around individuals that have expressed an interest in renting facilities or parts of. Definitely something we're always looking to explore. Diamond, again, if we are going to enter into that sort of agreement, requires a different level of repair work. But I think our first goal is always to try to address the internal challenges we have around storage of some storage of items, and I look to both Director Graham and McKay. I know Dave uses the Penn West facility for a number of storage requirements. Public Works has as well, and maybe he can speak to those.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So like here at the Town Hall, we have the Public Works yard, if you will. So we're really running out of room here at the Town Hall site for a lot of our needs. So we really find the Quarry Road site a benefit to store equipment in the off-season, to store some materials in the off-season. So we really do need the space. We don't have enough space here at the Town Hall site.
Well, and like I said, the last meeting, rather than just utilizing it as storage, I would like to see a long-term view on that as a potential, depot, rather than running back and forth up the hill. You're already, on top of the escarpment. You've cut down your driving distance and have a vision to proceed that way. And I think that, if that's in the long-range plans, then the $135,000 out of a building reserve to fix it and to actually restore an asset is then money well spent. So, Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. So I appreciate everything we're hearing from staff, and I do believe that there is great value in doing a tour. So I wanted to speak to that specifically. Back in 2014 or maybe 15, I had the opportunity to tour with the current, at that time, Director of Community Services. And I remember we toured and we went up to see something that is affectionately called the Tin Barn. And I don't know what the Tin Barn looks like today, but I hope that staff is looking at that, because if we're looking for opportunities for storage, that facility back in 2014, to my estimation, was not being utilized hardly at all. It wasn't, it wasn't fully, used, and it could be certainly organized to a better level. Let's just put it at that. So I really appreciate the fact that staff and the mayor and whoever is involved are going to go up and do a tour. But I hope we're looking at all our buildings holistically to make sure that we're making informed decision when it comes to storage. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could, just two questions. Maybe I'll start with your initial comment around, are we looking at the Quarry Road site in a more holistic way in terms of all of our land holdings? One of the things that you'll be hearing about more in 2020, now that our future is a little more clear, for lack of a better word, is the whole conversation around Beamsville District Secondary School and the town's assets from an administrative standpoint and an operations standpoint. One of the things that we've always identified is that should we look at different locations, and the Quarry Road site is actually an ideal site from that perspective to look at the way we deploy our operations vehicles, to look at where we would put a public works yard, and to look at how we would address snow clearing and our various other operational needs. And so that's definitely on the forefront of our minds, and things that now you'll be hearing a lot more about as we head into 2020. And I think to Councillor Brunet's point, I was also on that tour. I recall affectionately, for the first time going in that facility, I think we set the alarm off. Someone had to come up and shut the alarm off for us. My code didn't work. I thought the code I had and the key I had worked everywhere. Obviously not at that particular location. It was a site that was jam-packed at the time. We also drove by the tin barn, and my key did get us into that facility, and we did tour that. You're right, I think we can be a little bit more organized, for lack of a better word, on that facility, but definitely if there's an ability to maximize all of our spaces, staff will do that.
Thank you. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. As far as the Penn West building, I totally support the work being done there. It's a good location. It's very much needed. I don't know all what's in there in total detail, but I know there is a lot stored there. As far as the Diamond building, I have concerns putting money into that building when there hasn't been a discussion at this point of what we're even going to do with that building. So that's where my concerns are. So I would be leaning more to a deferral on that, maybe a patch till we can figure out what we actually want to do with that building. Thank you.
Okay. Project number 7, the Heinen Drive yard upgrades. Councillor Manchima.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. So through you to the CAO, we were just talking a minute ago about the possibility of moving our operations to Quarry Road, or at least a part. I'm not sure what you were referring to, but is it wise at this point to invest this money in Heinen Drive when we might be looking at that potentially in the next 4 or 5 years?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this was actually a conversation Director Graham and I had, and he can correct anything I say that may be slightly inaccurate. But if I recall correctly, it would still be a site that we require. I know this was a question, Councillor Pachariva, you had when we were first presenting this. If we look at, again, the way we'd want to deploy all of our vehicles, we wouldn't want vehicles going above the escarpment to fill up on sand. We wouldn't want to be looking for another sand location, salt location, et cetera. So when a number of our urban centers are below the escarpment, we would want to have a strategic location down here. And so I think looking at this particular property, if we were to part ways with, that being across the street would be something we would want for our operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Okay, project number 8, fleet expansion. And that was dealing with the innovative vehicles. Okay. Project number 9, the Heritage Village Storm Water Maintenance Pond Rehab. Councillor Manchima.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I wasn't here for the last meeting, so I apologize that some of these questions may have been asked already. So $355,000 for renovations and cleaning to the pond, is that, I'm wondering, is that something that we're facing because we're not doing regular maintenance to that pond, or what is, that seems like a big chunk of money all of a sudden.
Councillor, it's actually half of what was projected last year. So Director Graham can speak to that. Councillor Brunet did raise this question at our last meeting.
Okay.
Director Graham.
Thank you, through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. This is fairly significant cleaning too, and every time you clean a stormwater management pond, you have to, we test the material, because the material is a lot of sediment and it can have like oils and salts in it. So it's really the disposal costs that add a lot to these projects. We can't just take the material that we take out of the pond and, take it to a fill site, if you will. It has to be sometimes taken to a landfill site because it could have contaminants in it related to oils and things like that, because it cleans all the street water. So that's really a lot of the cost that you see with this project.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Sure,
Mr.
go
Chair?
ahead.
How often do we anticipate having to do this at that particular site, or?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, I would say probably about every 15 years, we should be proactively cleaning this pond, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Councillor. Okay, project number 10, Conkle Creek remediation Phase 2. Okay, project number 11, Red Maple Avenue storm sewer construction. Number 12, the First Avenue water main replacement design. So the design will come this year, and then we'll be able to go to construction next year. Number 13, the Freezin neighborhood water main replacement, Phase 1. Number 14, the biggest project, but a driver for future growth, the Prudham's water main upgrades construction. Councillor or Vice Chair Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we did kind of touch on this at the last meeting. Again, I'm just looking at the term of the debenture, 20 years. I know we kind of volleyed out there to maybe bring it down to 10 years. But if 73% of this is going to be funded by DC charges, which essentially encapsulates that whole 5.5 million that we're putting into long-term, wouldn't we be getting that up, or receiving it a lot earlier than even 10 years? Like, when do we think that will be received in the course of time?
Through Mr. Chair, I will defer that to Kathleen, who has a better idea of that build-out and phasing.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So in regards to the Prudham's development, it is a fairly substantial development. So we do kind of expect that it'll probably take probably about 10 years to get built out.
Okay, so it'll be 10 years then until the full DC charge will be brought in?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think what Kathleen is saying is that before it's fully realized, it will take us 10 years. I think, the other balancing that we often do is that what are the carrying costs associated with going from a 20-year to a 10-year, and what does that do to our ability to fund other projects and just maintain operations? So I think that also plays into the 20-year debenture versus a 10-year debenture. I think one of the other factors, we're incredibly optimistic, and I know we've got representatives from the development group for Prudham's here this evening, but I think, we've been given that 7 to 10 year horizon. Again, I think if we're optimistic, that'll be true. It may take a little bit longer, and so I think erring on the side of a 20-year debenture with the rates is absolutely ideal. I know one of the questions you had, Councillor, last time was, can we pay it off sooner? And I think we said I think Terry answered the question at that particular point in time. Typically, we don't pay off our debentures sooner. I think that's not to say that we can't. We absolutely can. Okay, we can't. Terry's nodding both ways, so it's either we can or we can't. We cannot. I think that was the question that was the answer she also gave you last time. And so I think 20 years is actually the safe bet for us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my commentary was just, I thought that the DC charges would be realized a little earlier. If it is on that 10-year plan, then it is what it is. So thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mikluck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the CAO. So earlier this year, we passed a CIP program with regards to new development and DC charges. Is this 73% from DC charges, is that based on the DC charges at full rate, or is is there any consideration for the possibility of a reduced rate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have a mixed-use CIP currently right now, Councillor. We are in the, I think, final stages internally of looking at what sort of CIP-type program we may have for Prudhomes. We haven't brought that forward to council yet, and so I think anything we propose will be cognizant of what we've budgeted and what we've got in terms of the development charges we're apportioning. So definitely a good point for us to keep, I think, front of mind when we come back to you with whether that be TIGs, whether that be DC reductions, whether that be some other element or combination thereof of a program for CIPs.
Thank you very much.
Okay, project number 15, Hickson Pumping Station upgrades. Okay, number 16, fire equipment. '17, the fire safety trailer. Number 18, fleet replacement, or fire fleet replacement. Sorry about that. Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Chair Patrieva. So, this one caught my eye last year, and it's catching my eye again this year with regards to the Rehab water rescue. So further, like, Mr. Kirkopoulos had submitted that slide with what these trucks do. I'm going to ask perhaps the Deputy Chief Blake, what happens? Volunteer fireman gets a phone call, pager goes off, they show up, they get to the scene as quick as possible. Currently, where would these guys go to the bathroom if they had to go to the bathroom?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, our current situation is the firefighters would grab one of the vehicles on scene, so whether it be one of our squads or a smaller vehicle, the better, obviously, and attend the closest fire station.
Okay, so that, yeah, this is one of the things I've been toiling with this ask, and I judge a restaurant by its restroom, and if we don't have a decent restroom, and especially when we're in these remote areas, I'm seriously looking at this purchase with an open eye than I did prior to that last slide. So yeah, all right, that's all I got to say. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Chief. Project 19, the Vineland Columbarium. Councillor Rinchima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about, we talked at one point about having columbariums and scatter gardens. So have we established any scatter gardens in any of our cemeteries at this point? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, we do have scatter gardens in our cemeteries.
How many do we have?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to pull up the sheet to look exactly, but we at least have 3.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Okay, Project 20, the Fleming Library Shade Structure. Councillor Timmers.
Mr. Chairman. The shade structures, I'm just a little confused because if you turn to, I had it written down here, the project for Rotary Park has shade structures listed as well. I'm just wondering, do we need that many shade structures in one location? I'm sorry, I can't find the Rotary Park one. I wrote it down.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, while others, I think, are,
It's listed
Project
twice.
30.
yep, we'll maybe looking through that, and I am looking at CEO Andrews
Here it is.
nodding. One is really associated with the building and the library specifically, and the other one, you know, without being specific in terms of location, will be in the center of the park. And so they are different, but definitely Ms. Andrews may have more to add to that, but they're definitely different. This one, as you can see from the picture, is very much associated with the library entrance to the east of the facility and the site, versus the ones that we're proposing as part of Rotary Park, which are different types of structures, more permanency to those structures versus this one, as you can see from the pictures. These will be things that are going to be removed in the winter months and placed back up to do various external programming and those sorts of things that the library is looking to undertake.
Okay, thank you. I saw it listed twice, and I understand they're in different locations, but maybe we'll talk about that when we get to the Rotary Park, because it's listed at 400,000 on Rotary Park. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And if it helps, Councillor Timmers, this was one of the structures that was envisioned originally at the Fleming Center, about opening, you know, making that rotunda area actually functionable. And the new Merce in West Lincoln has something similar, but without a cover. And it just opens up the possibilities, not only for the library, but other groups. And, you know, sitting on the library board with Vice Chair Russell, we had actually talked about a door coming out and making it fully accessible. The possibilities are endless on what you can do. And like CEO Kakopoulos said, the other one is over at the park to provide shade and relief for parents and kids, and so they're two distinct locations, if that helps. Councillor McPherson.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just on that, I think Shannon has some comments.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. We're using the category of shade structures, but they're very different. So as was mentioned, the sales at the library we would actually remove them in the winter to help protect them through the season. The structures that are being proposed in Rotary Park are permanent pavilion-like structures that we would be able to rent out, much like we do the pavilions at Charles Daly. And there are also several shade structures in Rotary throughout the park.
If I may,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much, Shannon. That really clarifies it for me. I just saw them listed, and I needed to understand the difference. Totally get it, makes sense. That space at the Fleming Center, you know, I agree. It would make a fabulous space with shade, and it would create that outdoor space. So I do get that. I just needed to understand the difference, so thank you very much.
For the first time, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the Director of Community Services. The drawing does not show a lot of furniture, and I know in the report you do mention that furniture is already there. Is this a good representation of what's there, or do we need to look at putting some investment into some furniture that would promote the use of this lovely tent? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. I would say we start with the shade structure and look at the requirement to put more benches or other furnishings out there, depending on how the library plans to program and use the space. We would also be using that space for our summer camps and programming, so I wouldn't want to put too much or identify too much furniture for that space until we really can live with the space a little bit and understand how we're going to use it.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, you know, I'm just thinking that if people will be wanting to go out there to read a book, you know, yes, we'll have classes, and yes, we'll have camps that we'll use, but, you know, other than that, you know, we've got what will be a very attractive area to be outside in the summertime, and I just, you know, would not want to see people standing. You know, let's take it to where we need to take it and get the proper furniture in there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Minchima.
Thank you, Chair Pacharia. This question again may have come up before because I'm thinking when I wasn't here, because when I first look at these, I think of windstorms carrying them away on day 2. That's what I see when I see these shade structures. I like the idea, but I can see a good windstorm ripping them out. So how sturdy are they? I guess that's my question. How sturdy are they? What do we know about them? I wouldn't want to lose them.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, these are designed as to withstand high winds. They're being used in many municipal environments currently, but yes, to ensure the longer life cycle, we would be removing them for the winter because of the ice and snow.
Okay, so we know them to be sturdy even through heavy storms in the summer from what we've looked at for other municipalities using them?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct, councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if it helps, Councillor Minchima, and I was really, really pleased to see this in this year's budget on my travels. I came across these at a park in Collingwood and had a chat with the parks director there, and it opens up a possibility of multi-use, and they haven't had any issues with them, with wind coming off of the lake. Okay, Councillor Mikluck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just curious, you brought up an interesting point about extending the life cycle of these by bringing, what exactly is the life cycle of these based on what you're bringing them, storing them, proper storage?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to get back to you on that, councillor, and check what's been quoted in the quotes we've received for these.
And then just a further, is there some sort of warranty or guarantee as to the life expectancy? I just hate for them to look nice for 2 years and then find out that they didn't work out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely, councillor. I will confirm that and send an email to council.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, Project 21, the Hickson Street parking lot. Councillor MacPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to say that I'm very pleased to see this project coming forward. This is something that was identified in our parking analysis and our parking strategy, and I'm not sure how many more parking spots we've captured at this Hickson Street parking lot, but and that's not needed to be answered tonight, but I think by putting the blacktop down, putting the lines on it, I think that will go a long way to identifying that as a municipal parking lot. It's not, a gravel, piece of dirt. So very pleased to see this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, through Mr. CAO, one of the questions that was raised last time was about the right-of-way, and have we addressed that going forward? Will this parking lot be accessible from both Mountain Street and Hickson Street, and identified with the green peas?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer the question in terms of, will it be identified? We're going to make sure that the green peas are there, that anything that's required to identify it as a municipal lot, further to Councillor McPherson's comment and question, is there. In terms of the right-of-way, I know Director McKay did look at that particular piece of it in terms of the sidewalk that's there, the condition of the sidewalk, any appropriate signing. We also looked at the driveway that's there and who owns that, and that isn't within municipal ownership at this particular point in time, but Ms. McKay has the details.
To you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. So what the town owns is the easement of the sidewalk easement
Right.
that is currently paved, or not paved, sorry, it's actually concrete.
It's concrete.
Right. So the easement, the adjacent easement is privately owned.
Yeah, and a number of years ago, we used to pay that owner a sum of money to allow us to use it, and this was a process that was discontinued by the previous CAO. So I'm just wondering if we are going to revisit it, because, you know, one of the linchpins of the BIA was, you know, having accessible parking, you know, being accessed, and the owner of the property had inquired about it because he wants to be able to facilitate that, so.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I think the comment that I would make is that we'll definitely
into it.
explore that as an option. I know Director Graham and I spoke today. You know, we'd have to confirm with the region. I think they often don't like us exiting onto their regional roads, so we'd have to do a little bit of convincing. But definitely something that I know you've brought up in the past, so thank
Okay,
you.
Great. Project 22, Charles Daly Park improvements. To 23, the basketball court resurfacing. Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question about the recent application for funding and taking some of those basketball courts to a higher level of surface. And I apologize, I didn't, and maybe they were identified in the, are they the same ones? So why would we spend this now? Why wouldn't we wait and see and then make our decision then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we certainly could at the time. These were in before the ask came to have us include them in the ICIP funding that we just submitted yesterday.
So do we lift them, potentially?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, maybe I could suggest that, similar to what we've done in the past, that, you know, keep them in but make them conditional on hearing back from ICIP first. So if we hear back from ICIP, then this $57,000 goes back and isn't spent on the capital levy. If we hear back and we're unsuccessful with them, then we continue forward. But we make this ask conditional on ICIP first as an option.
That's an answer.
Okay, project number 24, the Beamsville Lions Club Investment Capital. Number 25, Town Pole Banner Hardware. Councilor McPherson, it took you a while to get going, but you're
Well,
in here like a dirty shirt,
you
but
got
go
the
ahead.
The report's right questions. So I really like this project. I guess the only question I would have is reusability, and if you could tell me about how are they reusable, and also how many? And one third question, sorry. I'm assuming they're in the downtown cores around town. Is that a fair assumption?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll let Ms. Zane answer that question.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, it's 74 poles, so existing poles as well as an expansion throughout the town, and they are versatile in the sense that they can hold a banner, Christmas decor, a hanging basket. So the intention would be that we have something up seasonally all year round. When we take down Christmas decor, banners go up, they stay up, and then if we take those down, florals go up. So they are distributed throughout the town, but any existing poles that we already have outfitting on in the downtown would be included in that, yes.
So thank you, Sarah. So the BIA has been wanting to put banners up in the downtown core, and obviously, you know, that's not going to happen next year with the 50th anniversary. But can we assume that these banners would be or this infrastructure or these would be available to put up a local organization's banners, or are these going to be held to town use?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the councillor, they would be town-owned. Certainly, the first purpose is for next year to celebrate the 50th, also to support the 2021 games. We'll be receiving a large amount of banners to recognize that in Niagara. So I think we would certainly work with various groups throughout the town to investigate their interest in them. I don't think that we would necessarily want to own and occupy all of them all the time, but we would have to look at what that process looks like as we move forward. So I think we'd be open to working with the BIA, the Chamber of Commerce, anyone who might want to use those, and perhaps it's staggering them so that they have some and we still have some as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Can you hit your mic, Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. My question is to Sarah as well. Sorry, Sarah. Thank you for asking that question, Councillor McPherson, because I didn't realize it was 74 poles. When you say across the town, you mean across the town, in every community?
That's correct, including Campton.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to bite my tongue. Project 26, the Beams Alliance Park upgrades. Councillor McPherson.
So, Mr. Chair, the only question I have is we've got two separate projects for Beams Alliance Park and why they are separated through to the director.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Yes, so the first project is actually submitted by staff. So the ask that staff have identified around asset management and good state of repair of the softball fields and new bleachers that we would like to acquire for that park to coincide with the softball championships next year that we will be hosting as part of the 2021 games, or a year in advance of the 2021 games. The second ask is an ask directly from the Lions Club, the Beamsville Lions Club, as there is an MOU which was executed in 2004 between the town and the Lions that stipulates that the Lions submit to the town before September 1st a list of capital requests that they would like to see in the park, and that as part of the budget process, council can accept, deny, reduce those asks. In the past, we've been able to speak with the Lions and sort of almost, if you will, negotiate our needs, their needs. This year, they've asked that the request come in its totality to council to be considered.
So, Mr. Chair, the investment then in the Lions Park is $125,000 this year, or 2020. So why would we not satisfy the MOU through the 2021 investment, through the 2021 games investment? We've got, it's an enhancement, it is an enhancement to the park. So why would we not just look at that as here's the 50,000 that you're asking for?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, the asks that we've made and identified as capital are not necessarily the same asks that the Lions Club has asked of the town.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the dollars, it's the ask.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Michalak.
Through you, just, forgive me, we're still on Project 26, right?
We are.
Okay. So I'm just, you know, again, this contingency is driving me crazy too. There's contingency and consulting making up almost a third of this project. No, sorry, correct me? It's 75,000 and I see 20 for contingency and 5 for consulting. Is that incorrect?
Yeah, no, the numbers don't, yeah, no.
Oh, sorry,
275, 300 And if you defer the lighting, then it's 75. So it's a $300,000 project.
Okay, sorry about that, I didn't
Yeah,
see
no
that
worries, no
breakdown.
worries.
All right, sorry.
The way that it's written,
Every now
it
and again.
appears what you said, right?
Yeah, I see the lighting taken up, but I didn't
Yeah.
see that 25. Sorry, my math is, it's gonna get better.
No, no worries, Counselor. And if I may, Ms. McKay, back to and I guess as being the chair, I get this leeway. Project 24. It says that the Lions have submitted a 5-year plan. Any thoughts of sharing that 5-year plan? And then 2, with respect to the 25 trees, and this goes back to our urban tree forestry policy that we're looking. We don't have a really good track record of trees. So, thoughts of with the purchase, the gator bags, where then the trees will be able to water it and get a better chance of taking hold. Because, that park in the summer is wide open. And, the grass gets scorched, and I would hate to see, new trees be put in and not take. So I'd really like to see that included. I don't know whether that's an operational. It's probably a first time buy, but just your thoughts on that, if you may.
To you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we can absolutely look at that, and we can speak to the arborist about that. I know that many of the trees that need to be replaced are dead ash trees currently in the park.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So project number 27, Park Asset Management Repairs Replacements, excluding sports parks. Okay, number 28, the Permanent Leash-Free Park. Councilor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I asked this last time as well. Is it possible to get a design on the park prior to committing? My question being that, again, when you look at other dog or leash-free dog parks, certain setups are preferred over other setups. If you look at the one in Grimsby on Lake, where it's got 2 sections, a smaller section for smaller dogs, a larger section for larger dogs, so on and so forth. Just want to make sure that the plan that we're going to put together is the best fit. I'm assuming that probably is anyway, but in case there might be a couple things that might need a little tweaking, making sure the budget is going to be spot on. Is it possible just to see that iteration prior to assigning a direct budget to it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So the ask right now is to replace the temporary fence with permanent fencing, the same amount. So it is not changing the design to incorporate a small dog area and a large dog area. If that were to be the output of the pilot after we have spoken with residents and engaged the community, that would be a new ask that we would either come in year for or ask for in the next budget year through that budget process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and a question to Ms. McKay. This was brought up last time by Councillor Brunet. Possibility of this being a sponsorship through one of the local businesses. So removing it from the capital levy, but having it actually sponsored, and then the recognition going to that company for their donation. Have we explored that?
To you, Mr. Chair, we have not yet explored that, but we intend to before we would actually go out and make the purchase.
Okay, great. Project 29, the Tallman Drive easement restoration. Okay, just, and question to Mr. Graham, is because this is so small, could this not be bundled with road rehab, right? It's paving. So just curious, or was this going to take someone special to do it?
Through Mr. Chairman, that's a good suggestion. I think for this type of paving, it'll be pretty narrow. So I don't know if our typical road contractor, it'd be different equipment, but I think,
Okay.
As we start getting our tenders ready, that is a conversation we'll have internally to see where we can leverage, our different contracts to complement each other, so.
Okay, and then maybe another thought too is, as part of the Rotary Park, there's gonna be paved paths through there. I mean, bundling this with that together rather than, a standalone price for that might be a thought, so just wanna throw that out there. Oh, project number 30, Rotary Park. Councillor McPherson.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Russell's comment earlier, so we've got a fairly sizable contingency here. I think it's somewhere in the 8% range, and, I certainly understand contingencies when you're digging pipes and you're, running into rocks and things and projects are delayed. I'm struggling with a contingency of this size for a piece of green lawn that, is in a neighborhood. So I would ask that we look at this particular contingency, running at 8% over a, $3 million project, seems to be significantly high. And that we come back with something that is more reasonable to what we're doing here, putting up a park.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think when we come back for final approval, we'll have given that a deeper dive, a second look, a third look,
Okay.
and make any necessary changes.
Okay, terrific. Bless you, Councillor Timmers. Bless you again. 3 times the charm. Project 31, Jordan Hollow Park enhancements. 30, Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. I know Councillor McPherson had spoke to this item last time, and I personally don't agree, or don't support a play structure in that location. So I'm just wondering if we could look somewhere else that it could be suitable to. I just find it a very, it's not a pedestrian friendly, it's very dangerous through the hollow. We don't want to encourage children trying to get to that park, so I personally don't think it's a good location. So either we scrap it altogether or we look somewhere else that we could put it. I don't know where else, but that's just my comments. I know Camden badly wants a play structure for their children in that area, but I don't know where it could go. So I'm just putting that on the table, and I don't know if Shannon, if you have any comments with regard to what I'm thinking?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, that was certainly what we heard at the first review of this. So I believe it was stated that if the desire was still to make investment in that space, because it is well accessed, especially in the summer, we could be looking at a shade structure of some sort, picnic tables, more of a stop and rest area for visitors and seasonal tourists who come through that. So we haven't come up with a plan, but would, if council's desire is to still have an investment in that space because of the number of visitors and tourists and who use that area.
Fair enough. I do agree. There are a lot of people that do visit that area, especially in the nice weather. It's very busy. I just, I think looking at other options, like a shade structure, makes a lot of sense to me. So anyway, thank you very much.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just following up on Councillor Timmer's comments, yes, the comment was made that a play structure probably wasn't appropriate, but I certainly do not want to lose the investment in that particular park. So if we could consider other options for that investment, for that park that are more appropriate to the hikers and those that are using that park, would be great. Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that we're not just passing over important little spots in our town, because I think this is quite an interesting little location. So I'm very much more in favor of the stop and rest idea. And I did speak at the last meeting about ensuring that the current heritage features be upgraded so that we don't lose that, and also enhanced heritage features, which could also include an indigenous interpretation of that particular transportation route. And the entire motivation around that is to draw more people up into the village. So, Mr. Chairman, through you, do we think that this could be reworked? You know, we don't want to lose the investment for sure. Can this be reworked for the next go-around so that we can be confident that this will take place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, one of the comments that I did want to make, and we had a very robust conversation at the last meeting, was that we keep the funds in there, but we come back with a plan, do a little bit of consultation, but definitely the cultural element of the plan remains important. Connection to the museum, connection to the village, I think a recognition of the history and heritage elements of the particular area and the things that are there. So absolutely, we would still, from a staff perspective, recommend keeping it in, but coming back with a new plan for what's included there.
That would be very desirable, Mr. Chairman. The structure that is there now with the, it's a bit of a buckboard, that's probably an Americanism, but it was a farm wagon of one type or another. It was built by local volunteers from the Jordan area, volunteers that were intimately involved in the museum for many, many years. So I certainly wouldn't like to see that deteriorate. Thank you.
Okay. Project number 32, the 21st Street Bailey Bridge maintenance and repairs. 23, another one of our big drivers, the Jordan Village Improvement Project. First step is the utility relocations. Project 34, 2020 Road Rehab Program. Project 35, the 2020 Culvert Rehabilitation and Replacement Program. '36, 13th Street Road Reopening Reconstruction. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to acknowledge Janet and Mike Barkway, who have come to sit in tonight, and we've worked very closely with the Barkways over the last probably 4 years, 4 years, with this issue. I appreciate the history that Mr. Kakopoulos gave us going back to 2013 and the washout of the road. I did want to make a couple of comments with regards to current state, you know, and there was a item in the report or in the presentation that there are staff are not aware of any recent concerns from the agricultural community. Well, there is concerns specific to the Barkway property that, you know, are forcing them to take their agricultural equipment down 13th Street, getting on to 4th Avenue at 80 kilometers an hour, going over to 15th Street, coming up to Horton Road and back to 13th Street to farm their property. And that probably takes them 20 to 25 minutes to do that, depending on the traffic, whereas prior to the washout, it was a couple of minutes to get onto their property. Couple other things, and these probably are not new to Public Works, in that there are trucks that continue to go up 13th Street, find out it's a dead end, and start backing up down 13th Street back onto 4th Avenue to exit the road, you know, to move on their way. So there's and that's, from what I'm told, is a weekly occurrence. There are issues with cars parking at the end of the dead end and doing what they want to do, and then leaving debris, garbage behind, and, whatever else at the dead end. And again, there are a lot of folks that are heading up that way, finding out it's a dead end and turning around in the driveways of, private property and, damage that's caused to these private properties. Not to mention, and I've spoke about this, when we came forward with the proposed closure, that this is a rural road that, we value in our community. We value the rural community that we have, and to just make a decision to close it, I personally think it's the wrong decision. We have a dead end already on 13th Street, so at one time you could navigate 13th Street right from the South Service Road, right up through past 4th to Regional Road 81. So today you can't do that because there is another dead end. So I see this as a need in our community. I see this as a good investment. I think the staff has done a great job of bringing this in at a very reasonable price, and fully support this particular project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm share the same sentiments as Councillor McPherson, and been kicking this around the can for a number of years. If we have to decide if we're actually going to do this or not, I think the time has come. There's no sense dreaming about it if we're not going to actually do it. A question I have for Director Dave Graham is, do we identify other possible roads that could be a victim of this sort of a unfortunate occurrence? Do we have an idea? Like, is there other roads that could possibly be washed out, and do we identify them and deal with them to prevent this from happening to anyone else?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, so yes, we do. We look at our higher risk roads where they're located on sort of ravines, escarpment areas, where we can see a lot of drainage coming down those areas. We're trying to develop better ditching programs to try and look at managing some of the runoff, in a better manner. Again, as we develop our climate adaptation plan, we're putting that lens on, what we're doing with our road maintenance, our capital investments, because we are anticipating a lot more sort of intense rainstorms, and that's what this one was at the time.
And that's, thank you. That's the point I'm trying to make is this is an extremely unfortunate event that occurred. I'm hoping that it wasn't preventable, and I'm hoping that in the future it doesn't happen again by taking a look at the roads that we have and the culverts and ditches and making sure this doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Councillor Brunei.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. So I certainly appreciate the comments of the two councillors on the other side of the horseshoe. I'm not in any way, shape, or form lobbying for the closing of any road, and I think the previous council made a great decision in making the decision when we did not to permanently close this road, and to ask our staff to come back with a fulsome design and detail. And I do agree with Councillor McPherson that I think our staff has come back. I believe, the other way of going about this with piles and sheet piling and all that stuff was going to be well over $1.5 million. So, but I think it is in a year when we're looking at a $30 million budget. I again want to reiterate, I'm not one in favor of closing roads, but when I look at roads like Frost Road, we've had roads closed for 14, 15 years. And then ultimately we make a decision that it's in the best interest to demolish them and then look at active transportation routes. So this road has been closed for over 5 years. And in a year when we're looking at $30 million, I think it's very cognizant that we look at, the money that we're spending here, $872,000. I know when we went and visited that, I talked to residents that lived on that road, and a number of them said, you know what? Over time, we have changed our patterns. I remember a big driver on this project when we looked at it before was the migrant workers. Well, I'm pretty sure that the migrant workers have found other ways to get to the grocery store and get to the bank. So I'm not going to argue against this project. I just want to make sure that this council is looking at this holistically. You know, when I look at the money we're spending on the Prudence Water Main, Red Maple Storm Sewer, Rittenhouse Road, and the Jordan Improvement Utilities, that's $12 million. And now we add this, there's $13 million. That's a lot of money. And I just asking that we're looking at this holistically and making sure we're looking at it the proper lens for all our taxpayers. Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Brunet comments on a lot of the thoughts that I had as well. My other concern was that would this be a permanent solution? Again, would there be a risk of the same situation happening again? Again, I wasn't around on council when this happened the first time, but is this a permanent solution going forward, that there's zero risk that this will happen again, or is there still that potentiality for us to put this sizable investment for, again, a few residents benefit, but again, it could happen somewhere down the road with, again, the way we're seeing water management in the region.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, this design looks at sustainability. So when we rebuild the road, we're going to use a lot of natural vegetation on the side slopes to make it more robust or resilient. That's kind of the principle behind it. So I would consider it a permanent fix. I mean, you can have a massive storm that could damage it again. We can't guarantee that won't happen, but you know, we're considering this as a permanent repair.
Okay. And one last comment. What's the signage like? Again, Councillor McPherson mentioned there's a lot of trucks going down, turning around, not knowing that's a dead end at this point. What's the signage like down in that area to prevent that from happening before they turn down that road? Is that something we can look at as a countermeasure?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, by all means, we'll look at the signage. Again, I know the signage that has been installed, I think, is pretty good in terms of warning drivers that it's a dead end, not a through street, et cetera. But, you know, we can always look at what other improvements can be made to the existing signage.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I respect Councillor Brunet's comments and his concerns. However, one of the things that myself and Councillor McPherson heard at our last ward meeting is, what are we doing for our rural residents? This is a rural road that connects a lot of, you know, it's a thoroughfare for farmers and for travelers alike. And I have to ask, like, what are we doing for our rural community members besides painting a yellow line down the middle of the road? So that's some of the feedback that we heard from our last ward meeting. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just would like to respond to Councillor Brunet's comments that, you know, I think it's unfair to throw out the $30 million. I think we know that, you know, 12 million or so of those dollars are tied up in about 3 projects, and much of that is DCs or you know, it's coming as DCs, you know. So I think we've got to look at this individually. I think we've got to look at this as 6.5 years now that this thing has been sitting there. And I would say that it's a reasonable cost. You know, if you look at doing a bridge in the rural area, I mean, you're spending this kind of money. So I mean, we are looking at keeping a very nice rural road open. We talk about cycling in this town, and it's a cycle route through there. If you travel through there, it's very picturesque. And I think we got to be careful lumping it all into, what is admittedly a substantial capital budget, but, many of the projects that we're looking at are well in excess of $1 million. And obviously the Prudhom's property, or the Prudhom's projects is gonna make up $7.5 million of that 30. So let's make a decision. I agree with Councillor Mikulak that, this thing's gone on too long. We need to make the decision, and I think it needs to be made on its own merit, with what we're saying we need to do here. So let's make the right decision.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to see that we're certainly getting a good balanced discussion. The really a sad state of affairs here is that we do have examples in the town of decisions that were made to close roads. This isn't the first one. This is about the third one now. And this, I believe this is the final one, though, that we've had to clean up. Why does this happen? I think it happens because councils do not have a strong conviction around maintenance, and they don't have a strong conviction around the principles that they talk about over one side of their mouth and then forget about on the other side. And then someone along the way has to pay the piper, and so we're the ones that are going to pay the piper. So we have the issue of Transportation Master Plan, which this clearly violates, or the road wouldn't have been closed. We have the issue of community connectivity, which clearly this closure violated. It violates active transportation, absolutely. Now, granted, all of those policies may not have been in place when this road was closed. But the fact that we are a robust agricultural community on its own merit should never, ever have allowed this road to be closed, and should never have allowed the railroad bridge to be closed. There should have been a long-term plan put in place. Instead, both of these routes were closed, and it is truly unacceptable. So the whole idea around making value judgments about how many people live on a street, there are many roads in our rural areas where there are very few people on the streets, and they're not being excluded from the road rehab program. So we know that value is not considered, and rightly so. So regular maintenance and the avoidance of neglect in terms of maintenance, all of these things, and sticking to our guns when it comes to the principles that we're working from and our values. However, since I'm sitting beside Councillor Brunet, and I know that he's also looking at this very seriously, I don't happen to think $30 million is too much for capital budgets when the largest proportion of it is coming from development charges. It fits within our policy. So that does not, there's no merit in that for me. This is about doing the right thing year after year after year, making sure that you don't disappoint people because all of a sudden their road is closed. Now, if we have to delay this another year, if we put half in this year, and I realize that right now that half is a debenture. So, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Kirkopoulos, how could we reorient the source of income so that we could consider putting half of it in the bank this year, and then next year finishing this up without any question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, definitely an option. We would look at the various funding sources for each of the projects that we currently have within the capital plan, and could look at shifting some of those to accomplish what I think the mayor's suggesting, and that is putting half the money away this year, and then moving forward with the project in 2021, knowing we've already got half the money in the bank. So really a 2-year phase-in of sorts for the project in terms of the way it's funded. So I don't have the details of how we would do that in front of me right now, but we can definitely look at funding for these projects and taking that approach.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly, when the time comes, put that on the table, and rather than, I'm counting votes, obviously, but I certainly don't want to see this go down the wrong road, so we can see. I would support this project being done this year. However, it is a big project. I would like to see everyone on board.
Thank you. Councilor Bernay.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. I appreciate all the comments that have been surrounded on this project. I can't let this go without commenting to Councillor Michalak when he says, what are we doing for our rural community and our rural residents? I don't think we have to look much further than project number 34 and the commitment that previous council and this council is making to the road rehabilitation. When I look at $2 million that we're spending, and when I look at, we're addressing deteriorated roads, 13 kilometers, and I look at the areas that we're going to address in 2020, and if you look at the list, Cherry Avenue, 15th Street, Martin Road, Martindale Road, 19th Street, Spring Creek Road, Staff Avenue, Fairline, I would suggest that most of those are rural roads. Thank you.
Before I go, because we're not going to get on the merry-go-round tonight, anything new are we going to add? Because we've already had our 2 questions. I'll give you a bit of latitude, councillors. So anything new?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be possible to find out what road rehabilitation programs we've done over the last 3 years with regards to the various wards?
Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so maybe I can chime in here. I mean, definitely we can provide council a list of what we do, but, you know, I'm going to hearken back to the principle by which we build our budgets, and I really want to go back to those principles in terms of looking at where the needs are, looking at whether it's keeping our good roads good, the state of good repair, looking at where things need to happen in the municipality. I can tell you from a staff perspective, we don't bring the lens of one area versus another area. We look at where the projects are required, what are the criteria, what is the state of those roads, what's in our previous asset management plans, what have we shared with council in the past, and of course, what's a priority for council. So, you know, as much as I think we can provide that information, you know, I wouldn't want to get into Ward 1 versus 2 versus 3 versus 4 in terms of how funds and, you know, how taxes are collected and so forth. Because I think when you look at our evolution, and I prefer evolution versus revolution, you know, our evolution as a community, you know, maybe has gone east to west, and at different times, I think, in our history, may have been the opposite. And I think that's just the nature of how things happen in a community. We are moving forward, going to have significant investments in all parts of our community. And so I think, again, while we can share that information, when we bring projects forward, it's because we think those projects need to get done. Cognizant, it's always council's decision, and we will loyally move forward and execute on council's decision. But we have brought forward a list of projects that we believe are important, but not based on rural versus non-rural, ward versus ward. And I know that's not where council's going, but I thought it important to highlight those comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kirkopoulos. And you know what, and having attended the Ward 3 meeting and you know, having, you know, been the chair of infrastructure and having been the budget chair, to throw out a brash statement that, you know, nothing happens in the rural area, I think is a NIMBY comment from a resident that maybe nothing has happened on their road. So, I mean, Mr. Graham can dig that up. We have spent millions of dollars on the rural road network. So you can't get caught up in that hype of just because it's a statement, there's validity to it. So, you know, looking forward to that coming through. It's about ebbs and flows. It's about doing things in a relative close proximity to get value for money. So, Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva.
Oh, but Councillor Michalak is still.
Well,
Oh, yeah, I didn't know. Sorry, Mike, I didn't go to you. So, you've got something new?
well, with regards to the red lines that you see all over Ward 3, some of those repairs, some of those maintenance upgrades make it more feasible in terms, you know, to get a better price with regards to the tenders. So, like, just because there's a lot of red lines within a certain area, It's just spending money now rather than spending twice as much down the road. That's the only point I'm gonna make, and that's all, thanks. And again, I'm not here bantering about fairness or equality or this and that. In the end of the day, we live in one town, and I want what's best for the whole town in general. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Okay, I'm not even going to go there. The priorities are where the priorities are. And it doesn't matter what ward it's in. If it's a priority and it's something that we must do, then we do it. And as far as this, this has been going on forever, the 13th Street Road. And I personally just feel like it's time to just get it done, do it right, and have it over. Like, it's been 5-6 years, which is way too long. It is a lot of money, but it's something that we have to do. And I've seen it across the town. There's areas where there's a huge need. And yes, the dollars are there and it's very expensive and maybe there aren't that many people in that area, but we can't look at it that way. We have to look at our priorities. And I would hate to see this shelved again or put off any longer. And so I am in support of getting this done and taking it off of our books and having it complete once and for all. So, thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Mike for the comments with regards to, the looking at the need around the town, and I know in the 5 years I've been on council, it does move around, as far as who's getting the investment this year, so everybody gets their investment over a 4 or 5 year period, so it does work out in the end that everybody gets what they need. So I would just, I appreciate the mayor's suggestion or the mayor's, option to look at this over a couple of years. I do feel strongly that we need to make a decision on this now. And, when looking at the capital levy, I think we are pretty much at the base number. So it's not sticking out there as an item that, is going to take us, $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 over the levy. So I think we got to decide for 2020, what are we going to do with 13th Street?
Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. I was feeling left out, so I figured I better comment. Somebody brought up the point of maintenance, and I think if we remember back to this actual occurrence that took this out, there's no amount of maintenance that would have prepared for that. So as far as looking at our other roads and saying, can we prepare for an event like this, I think that's kind of impossible. We can do our best, and certainly what Director Graham talked about, ditching procedures and keeping an eye on that is, but we forget how much water came down in a short amount of time, and the damage was much worse to the east of this. So just want to make a comment with the maintenance. The routes from north to south, I travel them almost every day in the town of Lincoln, are very disjointed to start with. To get from, QEW up on top of the hill without, going east or west and then continuing south or north, whichever way you're traveling, is kind of impossible. And this just adds to, some of those are very difficult and expensive to repair. So 13th and 9th, as Mayor Easton alluded to, are the CN's bridges are very costly to open up north-south routes to again. And so locally, within a mile there, we have 3 road closures. And as far as we can talk about farmers, we can talk about locals, we can talk about whatever. This traffic is just, there's a lot of traffic on 15th. I think Director Graham would attest to that there's a lot more traffic going down there because that's the only one you can get through now to wherever you're going, or else you head over east to St. Catharines and come down 7th Street. So I just think in looking in a little bigger picture in this area, this is the best place to kind of open up traffic again. I'm in full support of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good discussion. Let's get through the last 5 projects, and then committee like council is based on motion. So if there's motions going to come forward, then so be it, and then we can vote on it. So, project number 35. But maybe we'll mix in a small break in there after we get through the projects. But, project 35, 2020 culvert rehab and replacement program. Oh, 36, we did that. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going back and forth, flipping, keeping along with the discussion. Project 37, Aberdeen Road Slope Stability Feasibility Study and Road Widening Design. Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make a comment on this because we had a very similar situation occur on Quarry Road a number of years ago, which required a very, very substantial redesign and upgrade. And at the time, it was a very expensive project. However, as time has gone by, it certainly required that level of investment. So I'm hoping that we will be doing the same thing here. The amount of truck traffic, heavy truck traffic, that's on Aberdeen Road now is really quite substantial. The trucks are cutting across Hillside now and coming down Aberdeen, and it's really pretty substantial. So it's not too surprising that this is starting to break down. So this will require some very, very substantial design work.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mayor Easton. Project 38, the Beamsville Truck Bypass Implementation Study. Councilor Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman Patriva. Through you to, I believe, Director Graham or CEO Kirkopoulos, this was the email that came out this evening. That's what was referring to this.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councilor Reimer, that is correct, Councilor. So the $160,000 will now be $80,000, and it will be cost shared with Niagara Region.
Okay, thank you. And through to Director Graham, so the region, did we ask them for this, but is there a formula? And I'll jump over into our capital forecast where we have quite a few over the next 3-4 years projects, regional related, like the downtown Vineland core and well, the rest of Bartlett. But is there a formula? Do we just like hope the region jumps into these, or how does it come about?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So I think this is going to be the start of, the region's partnership with us on this whole matter. We look at this as, we're trying to find solutions in our community to better and safely manage the truck traffic. And, the trucks are coming from the regional roads, so it needs to be a joint venture. So at this point, we're just looking at, let's establish a partnership. I think this is a good time to establish a partnership, a working relationship with the region, because this is kind of the first step in moving forward with implementation of a truck bypass.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just add a little bit to Director Graham's comment in terms of that negotiation, or what is that formula, and Dave and I had this conversation in his office a few hours ago. This one's a little bit different in that there isn't a direct correlation from the perspective of a formula we can point to. Some of our other projects, if I think about the work in Jordan Village, Vineland and Victoria, some stuff are very specifically the responsibility of the region and specifically the responsibility of the town, and sometimes that's a little bit easier. This one, I think, as Director Graham highlighted, because trucks are coming off regional roads, I think we can make a case that they should be at the table. In this case, it was a 50% at the table. That would absolutely be the starting point I would like to have, and I think Director Graham would like to have as we look at Bartlett more on a long-term basis.
So if I may, Councillor Patriva, Chairman Patriva, just to carry on that, so the number that we have in our long-term forecast, we'll stick with Bartlett. So we have, I believe it was about a $10 million forecast in a few years. Is that reflective of the region helping out, or is that the whole project and we're budgeting for it?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So, one of the important parts of the study that we want to do is we're going to further quantify what we need to do to Bartlett Road in the future. So in your 4-year forecast where we have that, big number for Bartlett Road, we still need to quantify that through this study process. But right now that number, we're just assuming it as a town cost, but we do want to, start working with the region to see how we can work together on, that type of investment in the future. So at this point, it doesn't include a regional cost share at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Project 39, Lincoln Avenue Phase 1 Road Reconstruction. Construction. Councilor Reimer.
I'm on a roll, Chairman.
You
Patrick.
are,
Just gotta keep me
yes.
going.
This is your alley.
This is, through to Director Graham again. This is the project that was already tendered once, and we kind of sent it back, hoping it will be, if it comes back higher again, what do we do with it?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, I mean, great question. I think where we are right now, you know, the budget we're bringing forward is what, it's a estimated budget on what we really think the project will cost based on our best judgment and market value, et cetera. We'll have to see what the numbers come back as, what they look like, and see what the market, you know, value is to do that work. And then we'll have to bring a report to council and talk about, you know, we hope it would be within this, but if it isn't, we'll have to talk, you know, with council about, you know, if it's over, you know, what the options are to move forward with the project. So we feel the number before you tonight is a good number on what we could expect that project to be worth. So we're hoping the retendering results will be more favorable than they were initially.
Thank you. And one more, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chairman, just to follow up to that then, Director Graham, is there a point in time where, like, this is still being done by the developer? Is there a time where we take that over and run with it, or is that not? I mean, by we, the town, that we take charge of that?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, it may be something we look at depending on what the new results come back as. Currently, it's going to be part of a subdivision agreement. So at this point, it's part of the developer's off-site works, if you will, as for their development. So it may be something we need to look at depending on what happens with the updated tender results coming back. But
Thank you.
Okay. And project number 40, Rittenhouse Road Reconstruction. Council McPherson.
So through you, Mr. Chair, and probably getting into the weeds a little bit here, but have we got a dedicated bike path plan for this new road reconstruction? And if we don't, why don't we? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, so right now with the design we're looking at, and it aligns with the Transportation Master Plan. So the Transportation Master Plan talked about Rittenhouse Road should be a signed route. So what that means is what you would, so you're gonna have your street, and what we would do is we would have parking on one side of the road, and then you have 2 lanes left. So it would be a share the road concept. So what we'll do is we'll have signs to say, you know, share the road with bicycling, and we'll have the painted bicycle symbols on the 2 lanes of traffic. And that is appropriate for that type of road. We do follow standards as it relates to cycling, and basically based on the traffic volumes that road would experience. The posted speed's only 40 kilometers an hour, so it would be appropriate to do share the road concept, if you will, and that is in alignment with the Transportation Master Plan.
So through you, Mr. Chair, you know, I think it's going to be a missed opportunity. You know, I think there is good reason to look at this particular road and put a stamp on it that we are serious about biking in this town, and that we are going to dedicate a part of this road to allow kids to cycle to 20 Valley School and allow for some cycling across, you know, a pretty significant piece of piece of dirt in our town. So I know we can always lean on the Transportation Master Plan, and we can always lean on the Parks Master Plan, but sometimes we gotta just think about what makes sense here. And I think we do need to really give some thought to the visibility that would give us in making a commitment to cycling, walking, running, whatever it is. So just a thought at this point, and hopefully we are open to look at it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Minchima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, my question is about, for all these projects, all of our capital projects, we have, in the business case, we have risks and alternatives considered, and in this one, there is no risks or alternatives considered, and I'm wondering, is there a reason for that? Because I think that one of the criteria that we consider when we decide whether something is a need or a want is risks. So I noticed there's no risk in the business case here, so I'm wondering why. Was that just an oversight? Is there any risk that we need to be considering?
Director Graham.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, thanks for pointing that out. It looks like maybe when the sheet was printed, it just got collapsed. It should have a risk. I mean, it would be similar to the project before. When we look at risks for these projects, we're kind of looking at the risks in terms of implementing the construction of the project. So, in terms of, we're gonna have to, if it's a Rittenhouse Road, we're gonna have to have careful communication with the residents in terms of how we implement this project, looking at how we're gonna manage pedestrian traffic, et cetera. Alternatives, I mean, the only alternative really is to defer the works. So it would be, again, apologize, it's not on the sheet, but it would be similar to the project 39.
Thank you. So the risks would be, when we have a business case with a section referring to the risk, we're talking about the risk of not doing the project. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Chair?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we're looking at is, so it's the construction phase of the project. So what we're looking at is the different risks that we could come across in implementing the construction works. What are those risks? A lot of times it's, is there businesses you have to manage to implement the project? What's that impact? Residents, are you looking at impacts to traffic during the construction phase? Items like that, pedestrian management, is there a school nearby, that kind of criteria that we look at.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and if I can shed a little bit of light on that, Councillor Minchima being on the Active Transportation Committee, this was identified last year as one of the linkages that needs improvement. There's a walk and a ride to school day at 20 Valley Public School. This is no different from Elizabeth Street. School kids walking up the middle of the road because there isn't any sidewalks. Been identified as a risk, as a potential risk. There's no linkage to the park that's there. The risk, too, we take on is that we sat here at a public planning meeting and assured the community that this would be done in 2020. We've identified the risk. So deferring this is sticking your head in the sand and not going through. And then something like this, too, to Councillor McPherson's point, is that hopefully these items will come through budget-wise with active transportation route, with a paved cycle path, with an on-road, and the options, and then have the various committees, age-friendly and active transportation, now being committees, standalone committees, that they have input into them and make recommendations going forward. And then we take a more fulsome approach at how we want to do things. We can't always fall back on because the Transportation Master Plan says A, B, or C. Sometimes you have to look at what's best for the neighborhood. It was laid out as a framework. Doesn't mean we can't go above that framework. Again, if we've identified the risk and want to create a spine and don't want to miss opportunities, we need to look at a more holistic and fulsome way and not just look at that section, but look at the entire system, connectivity. So, Councilor Bernay. Sorry. You're in, you're out, you're in, you're out.
Thank you,
There
Chair
go.
Patrick. I just wanted to reinforce what you had said back in, I believe it was 2017. We had the opportunity to meet with the principal at that time of 20 Valley School, and we walked with the school board, with the busing people. We walked all up and down Victoria Avenue along Rittenhouse Road, and there was a number of drivers, not only the fact that there was a lack of sidewalks, but on Rittenhouse Road, there is, I don't want to use this word, but for lack of a better word, there is a group home there where parking is a severe problem. There's a youth drop-in center that at the time, I believe it's still there, is present on Rittenhouse Road. So there was a number of drivers that were identified through a number of residents on Rittenhouse Road, as well as the school board and the trustees and the principal identifying that the Rittenhouse Road needed to be urbanized. And I do believe we've listened to the residents and we've moved this up in the capital plan, and I'm glad to see this project moving forward. Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm also very pleased that we moved this up. However, what would we need to do at this stage in order to accommodate a bike path on this street? A good deal has changed since 2017. We have full-blown changes about to take place in this entire neighborhood. And so the conversation that you and Councillor Bernay just contributed indicates to me that we can't just leave this tonight. We have to determine what is the next step, not to hold it up, but to move forward with it and get that into this, because it's not just the people that live on Rittenhouse Road that are going to be impacted by this. This could very well impact Heritage Village if anything at all changes about the internal movement of people. And it's going to make a huge difference in terms of people from Cherry Hill, is it, we have Cherry Heights, we have Cherry Hill, Cherry Hill, getting to the local. And I heard this a lot before the election, during the election, to have that safe routing. That was extremely important to people, and you can understand why. And then, of course, we heard when we were launching the safe community project. I know that's not the right name of it, but we were at the school, and what did we hear? We heard that the officers were out every day telling people, stopping them, warning them, advising them, you've got to slow down. The fines are going to be doubled, and guess what? For the next week, they gave out 57 fines. So this is not a small thing, and people don't seem to learn very quickly. So we need to really make this quite safe, and we do need to look at this as a complete community. There is a lot going on here, and it's going to be a very, very nice neighborhood. Tight in Vineland, but still a very nice neighborhood. There's not much point in getting to the park, or trying to get to the park on Simon's Lane if you can't get there safely, if you have to go with your mom or your dad all the time. So my question is, what is the next step to get the bike path into here full-blown?
Mr. Kirkopoulos?
Through Mr. Chairman, I know Dave's eager, he's got his hand up, wanting to answer the question. I think he's going to tell you we're going to work to get it in, but I'll defer to Director Graham.
Through Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the comments being, talked about tonight with this project. Just a couple quick points. We are, the big drivers with this project were, number one, safety, pedestrian safety, speeding concerns. So, the current design that we're going with at this point, we have, put a traffic calming lens on it, if you will. We're gonna be, we had another concern with this project where people use this particular street to shortcut from between King Street and Victoria. So we're doing a lot of work at the entrance of King and Rittenhouse to make that road feel narrower, so people won't have the same, mindset to use as a shortcut. We're doing a lot of chicanes, type road narrowing throughout that road so that it's not like one wide, straight, consistent road. We're gonna pinch the road in a few spots with the curbing to kind of give it some traffic calming design elements. We're also looking at raised crosswalks on that road. Again, to slow traffic down, the pedestrian is gonna, feel much safer crossing the street. We're putting a PXO crossing in, so that's a pedestrian crossing down where the park trail comes out, and that's gonna have solar lights on it. So if you're a pedestrian and you wanna cross the street, you'll be able to push a light and do that. And one of the biggest criterias for this whole project has always been the need for a sidewalk. So, we're gonna be installing a sidewalk along one side of the road. Getting back to the bicycle comments, it is gonna be very challenging to try and have dedicated bike lanes on this particular road because there's only so much room on the road or in the right-of-way to do all these features. So we have to have a sidewalk on side of the road. We've got hydro poles and then you have the road curbs, et cetera. So to do bike lanes, we probably have to, you wouldn't be able to park on the side of the street. That would be one trade-off likely, because you have to have enough width of the road to have dedicated bike lanes. So what we've been going with to date, which does follow, all the traffic standards as it relates to cycling, is a share the road concept. Because, like I was saying before, it does fit, those standards. And, I do appreciate the bike lane comments, and that is something that you definitely want to put dedicated bike lanes in when you have your higher traffic volumes. Maybe you have more space in the right-of-way to do so and speed. So those are some of the constraints if we put dedicated bike lanes in, just to share that with you.
Councilor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Just to pick up on what Director Graham was talking about, some of those comments were raised, and to Councilor McPherson's comments about the bike lanes were raised at the open house at the library a couple of weeks ago. And having seen the plan, and just to reiterate what Director Graham has said about the traffic calming measures, I think, not that I'm a big biker, but I think that would alleviate some of the concerns. And I think you're referring to an email that went out today from someone from the Active Transportation Committee with concerns about the biking lane too. And I think the design speaks to that pretty well. One other comment to add to the traffic there, with two developments having taken place, proposed developments over the last year. I spent a lot of time on Rittenhouse Road, and I would challenge that after King Street and Victoria, that's the busiest street in Vineland. And Cherry Hill has built out, I don't know how many homes over the last year and a half, 2 years would have filled in. We have the potential for Azalea coming in there. And as Director Graham talked about, there's a lot of people that use it as a shortcut route, a lot of people. So there's a lot of traffic on there. So just to bring it back to Councillor Brunet and Mayor Easton about the kids there, they're fighting a lot of four-wheeled vehicles there. So this is very much anticipated project. A lot of excitement in the neighborhood about this. So.
Thank you, Councilor Reimer. Councilor Mikluck.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Just a question, with regards, so the proposed speed limit would be 40 kilometers per hour. Question I have is what's the existing speed limits in the neighborhood around there? Like, let's say Azalea, Magnolia, Glenview. What's the speed limit currently in those neighborhoods?
50. Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor. So the current speed limit on Rittenhouse Road, we did reduce it to 40, so it is currently 40.
Okay.
We've always considered that street to have a higher priority for safety. with the lack of sidewalks, that's a real concern. You know, with the shortcutting that's occurring, and things like that, so we reduce it to 40 already, so that's the current speed limit.
And if I may, does that go for Glenview? Does that go for the surrounding streets as well?
Through Mr. Chairman, no, it doesn't. They're still considered 50 kilometers an hour.
Okay, just a quick add-on, maybe we can consider at the same time lowering those speed limits in those areas as well to have some sort of cohesiveness in that neighborhood? Is that, if we could maybe look at that, that'd be.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we definitely can look at that. Our focus was to make sure that Rittenhouse Road had a lower speed limit to, you know, ensure drivers understood, you know, this street needs a higher level of driving slower with caution, but, you know, we can look at the surrounding streets to see if that would make sense, for sure.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I did not hear Mr. Graham say this couldn't be done. But I did hear him say it would be tight. And I'm having some difficulty reconciling the analysis that goes on at transportation, or the Active Transportation Committee, and what comes out the other end as the end result. I also went to the open house, and there's no question that the public are very, very excited. But the more we talk about this, the more I am very concerned about the fact that children will not have any dedicated, safe place other than the sidewalk. So that means they can't go on their striders, they can't go on their little scooters. They'll be just as limited as they are now, trying to get down to the park. So one of the principles that the staff in the town operate with is not no, but how to. So I guess we're there, because mostly all of that is built in because they do it so well. So now I have to say, okay, how to? How are we going to do this? And I'm assuming that there's a great deal of passion in the community about this all being done right. So I'm just pushing, as usual, to do it right if we possibly can. And what does that look like? And, you know, where's that additional space going to come from? And I recollect very clearly seeing where the poles are. It is tight at the moment, but I guess that's my question, Mr. Chairman, how to?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, why don't I take a stab at the how-to and suggest that, you know, this has been a very good discussion today on Rittenhouse Road. I mean, I see council's passion and support for this project. Let us go away and have a conversation and figure out what the how-to looks like, and if it is that trade-off around parking, then I think those are options that we consider when we look at the project itself, and have those, I think, you know, healthy debates, get the right type of consultation if required. So let us go away. You know, like I said, I'm familiar with the project. I know the details of the project, but not to the level of road widths, et cetera. So let us go away and have a conversation with our respective teams. And both Director Graham and I are nodding that that's probably a good idea.
Okay.
But I appreciate council's support for the project.
Thank you. Councilor McPherson.
Just very quickly, and just want to, you know, and I appreciate all of the traffic calming that Director Graham is speaking of, but add the seniors in here too. I mean, you've got seniors that want to cycle, and they may not be as confident on those cycles. And I mean, if we're going to really encourage people to get out of their cars and get out and walk and ride, you know, that's going to be a big part of it, that they've got a dedicated lane that they feel comfortable riding their bikes in. So I think it's important that we do everything we can to make it happen. Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I just recalled something that occurred within the last month. We had this big discussion at the region about equity. And so at first it was a discussion about males and females. But what it really came down to was one question when you're reviewing a policy, when you're looking at something like this. And the question is very simple. who is excluded from this plan? Who is excluded from this report? So we know that children are excluded in some way. We know that seniors are excluded in some way. Very, very important elements. And so based on that question alone, which takes a lot of the angst of, you know, we versus they, it really is a matter of who ends up being excluded when we make some of these decisions. And so it's just another way of looking at it, and I'm satisfied with the outcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you know what, we had talked about, one of my first talks about the 2020 budget was looking to be transformational, looking to be innovative, looking to think outside of the box. And just a simple discussion around the horseshoe here tonight, we've identified, you know, Rittenhouse Road to be the third busiest road in Vineland. You know, we've identified parking as a want or a need, and how much on-street parking is there. So, you know, maybe the thought is, and with a lot of these, is going back, get two designs. Get a design with on-street parking, get a design without it, and the dedicated, separated lanes. And then come back and, you know what, it's about that equity and how you can be involved. And if you never push the envelope to try to make change, you never will. So this could be a starting point, right? How it all ties in. Get the buy-in from those other committees and have them look at it and say, you know what, we're not going to do the same old, same old. We've said that there's traffic, there's speeding, you know, at the Active Transportation Committee. Those dedicated lanes give you a sense of safeness, give you a sense of commonplace. We can put a share of the road on there, and if still people don't feel safe, they're not going to use it. So let's have, you know, a couple designs brought forward, if that's possible, and take it from there. So again, back to the mayor's, how can we do it? So I'm going to leave you on that note. Mr. Garkopoulos, how can we do it? And to Mr. Graham, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Patrick.
You're welcome. So, knowing that items proceed with motion, we've went through the projects. I had someone flash in and flash out. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm jumping in. I just, if we can take a look at project number 17 again, the trailer, that fire trailer, and something just catches me is that attend schools, businesses, public events on average 40 times per year. Just questioning about the staffing of this trailer. Are we going to be incurring further staffing with regards to this trailer? Like who is going to be attending these functions? Who's going to be manning or operating this trailer?
Deputy Chief.
Through you, Chair Patriva, to the councillor. At the current time, we are going to be staffing it with 2 staff, was our, not full-time staff, obviously, our volunteer firefighters. So they would be staffing it 2 for safety reasons. One can be on the outside, one on the inside, but 2 minimum. They'll be staffing it at these events.
Okay, that's all, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Russell.
Mr. Chair, I just have 2 points of clarification. One is regarding Project 14. And again, I apologize for having to go back, but it's very quick and easy, I think. The 73% that's funded by DCs is, just to be crystal clear, that is from that Prudhom's development as currently been approved. Is that correct?
Ms. Dale?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So the way development charges work, it's not just development charges that are collected from the Prudhom's development, but it's actually development charges that are collected from all development that go towards all projects.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Dale. And one other point of clarification to Mr. CAO. I believe that there was going to be a takeaway that staff might go back look at those contingency funds again to maybe see where erasers might be more prudent than pencils. Again, I don't, from my point of view, I don't think any of those contingency funds in there would necessitate a non-approval of one of the projects, but just going forward, if everything is, I'm assuming we're going to be looking for approvals for tonight on these capital projects as an end game, that maybe staff can come back after the fact and just see where we might be able to tighten things up a little bit.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. I mean, I've definitely made note of the contingency as it relates to Rotary Park. And so we will similarly, I think, go through these all with that same lens, but definitely understand council's concern and consideration around contingencies. And as for the comment about what we're seeking tonight, I think it's, I mean, where I'd like to get to, I think, moving forward is approve a capital budget, approve an operating budget, and come to you with the total. We have always, I think, taken, a similar approach. These in principle will be deemed appropriate, and now we're moving to operating to have that conversation. Staff will then start the work of starting to look at our tender documents and so forth so that we can be ready once you give final ratification at the end of December to be out the door early to get these awarded as early as possible. So, some level of confidence I think we have following tonight, notwithstanding any other motions that may come forward. Chair Pachuriva. Through you to Councilor Russell.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Vice Chair Russell. Are there any questions from council? Well, this is your, so are there questions? Are there, knowing things that go on motion? So Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know in the last meeting, or maybe it was not in the meeting, there was a question about adding, and what was the procedure for potentially adding a project that wasn't on the current list. And so my question is about the Jordan Lyons Park redesign. And I was surprised that we didn't have it on this list, in that we've got a pool potentially coming in 2021, and to be ready for that with a redesign of the park would certainly make sense to me. So I guess I put that to the CAO as to what is the thinking there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm definitely looking to community services, both Ms. McKay and Ain, to provide some comments should they have them. I know we are working with Niagara Region and the staff there. Caldoun has been working with us as we prepare the application for the ICIP program in terms of what a potential design would look like. Of course, we need to come to council and I think have further conversations. So in terms of a capital ask to look at specifically design, I don't know if Shannon has anything to add specifically to that and what that would look like, but I will let community services chime in and then I may have some further comments.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillors. So at present, we've just submitted the ICIP submission for detailed design and actually development of that park based on some concepts that would have to be obviously fine-tuned through engagement and other processes. We don't have enough information right now on the games, the potential additional costs of acquiring that pool and installing that pool on the site to make that ask. We are working with the game staff currently to evaluate 2 responses to an RFP that was issued for the pool to satisfy the games and potentially be reinstalled. But we just didn't have enough information to move forward at this point with an ask that we were confident in that we could execute on at this point.
Okay, so let me approach it a little bit differently. So we've got a 50-year-old pool. We've got an arena that's probably that old. We've got a development that's coming and coming 2021, that we're going to lean on that park as a key part of that recreation for that development. So wouldn't it be prudent of us to have a design in 2020 that could potentially start a build in 2021? So, and the whole thing about the asking for government funds is great. There's a chance we may not get them. And to lean on that heavily, I think, is really not the answer. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we can come back with an ask if it is desired from council this evening. We could, based on what we've been asked to potentially reduce, such as the contingency in Rotary, we could look at creating a new request for that concept design next year.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I see no other questions. So, we need a motion to receive and file the presentation on the capital budget review as information. Councillor Reimer. What didn't come forward? No. Okay. So Councillor Reimer is the mover of the motion. All those in favor? The question was to receive and file the presentation with respect to the capital budget review as information. Okay, all those in favor? And I saw everyone. All opposed? None. Confidential items, we have none. Staff remarks. Oh, Mr. CAO Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I definitely wouldn't want the job of a councillor. It is much more difficult than being the CAO. Notwithstanding that, just in terms of some next steps in going forward, I think I heard a few things. We're going to go back, look at contingencies as it relates to a few projects, and I think, tighten up some of our numbers, and notwithstanding all of that, and this potential for this addition as it relates to Jordan Lyons, the rest of the projects will be things that, we now go forward with, cognizant that we're coming back to you with operating and final approval in December. Just wanting to be clear on process.
Very good. Okay. Any committee remarks? Are we all talked out? Mayor Easton. Oh, it's...
Make sure that in Mr. Kirkopoulos's review, that the staff aren't going away with the belief that they need to come up with some strategies to avoid best practice when it comes to issues like contingencies. So I would like to understand better, what kind of fact-based approach are you going to take? Because there are many reasons why we have contingency plans. They are not pulled out of the sky. And I want to make sure that when you come back with your recommendations, that we don't have to look over our shoulder and worry that we have, that we're not paying attention to the details here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor's question, I think probably to provide a little bit more clarity, I think by no means are we going to go back and start cutting those in half or looking at them. I think we're going to look at a few projects that were highlighted. I heard specifically Rotary Park, and looking at that one, cognizant that it's a greenfield, for lack of a better word, and maybe we should look at that contingency. I think we'll review the process we undertook. I think it was a sound process. It was an evidence-based process. It was a data-informed process in terms of how the numbers were set. But I think we can always go back and look, be sure of that. The one that I think I've received probably the clearest direction was probably to look at Rotary Park, and so we can, add one more level of eyes to that. Look at how we came up with that contingency, and report back to council when we finalize the budget. But absolutely, Mary Easton, I think by no means are we going to start, cutting them for the sake of cutting them. I think we need to look at them, and most of them, I suspect, will be sound because they were developed with that evidence and that data in the first place.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out that for the last 5 years that I've been at the region, every time we got into cost overruns and every time there was an issue related to anything to do with the basic design, the geotechnicals, whatever was happening, it was all based on the fact that there was not enough work done, and that there was underestimations in every case of the condition of the land that was being taken, where the projects were going to be taken, and there always seemed to be surprises that came out of the woodwork. So I'm a little bit jaded. I want to make sure that that what's happening here is not the result of us trying to cut corners, but definitely, we need some explanation to satisfy everybody's needs for certain. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely to the mayor's point, and I think like council, I also don't like those project surprises.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question. Do we have any idea yet of what the regional budget is going to be coming back in as a percentage of increase?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, Mary Easton can definitely chime in. I've heard some interesting ranges. I don't want to speak for the region. I think they're definitely looking, and I think it's been reported in that 5 to 7% range. But the mayor may have a little bit more insight. I think they've got significant infrastructure challenges and catch-up challenges of their own. And so I suspect they're in that probably similar range of 5 to 7 from what I've heard.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything specific to ask, but to add. However, it is, I think it's safe to say that it's far too early. And I just want committee to know that I am pushing very, very hard to see a substantial increase in the police budget, specifically around the area of community policing. There were a number of us that met, I think it was Councillor Renee, myself, met with the chair of the Police Services Board to speak about that issue. This is a very important issue, and there are many areas where the region is behind. They are looking for considerable savings, but if those savings come back onto the communities, if they appear to be downloads to the lower area municipalities, we certainly don't want that either. So there's a good deal of examination that still needs to go on. I think the numbers probably aren't too far off, but I would be very remiss if I just threw a number out there, but I'm certainly looking for increases in the police budget well beyond what they're asking for. It's not nearly enough.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just further to that contingency thought, which seems to be generating debate, is it possible to have a contingency fund that blankets all of these projects into one, where should there be a need or a request for, we can find out about it rather than it just be pre-approved?
Through Mr. Chairman, I mean, definitely we can look at what are the practices municipalities undertake in a project-by-project basis versus something that's generalized like that. I think we'd have to do a little bit more research. But I think this probably, as we look at workshops and we look at populating some of our agendas in the new year, I think understanding project management methodologies and those sorts of things, lean processes, other things will be things that we talk to council about, I think, a lot more going forward.
And don't get me wrong, I'm all about contingencies. There's things that could happen that you just can't foresee. I'm pro-contingency. It's just, I worry a little bit about every contingency being maxed out when, where if it's a blanket where you have to draw from or you have to make an ask specific to that project that may or may not be going as well as planned, it'd be nice for council to have a better idea of what's going on that way. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, definitely, again, something we can explore, and like I said, I think, working with council to understand, how we do these things, makes for a good workshop in 2020.
Okay. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned.